the afternoon, Timothy said we'd make a rope. On the north end of the island, tough vines almost as large as a pencil were laced over the sand. It took us several hours to tear out a big pile of them. Then Timothy began weaving a rope that would stretch all the way down the hill to the beach and the fire pile. The rope was for me. If he happened to be out on the reef and I heard a plane, I could take a light from our campfire, follow the rope down, and touch off the big fire. The vine rope would also serve to get me safely down to the beach. After we'd torn the vines out and he was weaving the rope, he said, "You must begin to help with the other work." We were sitting up by the hut. I had my back to a palm and was thinking that back in Willemstad at this moment, I'd probably be sitting in a classroom 3 desks away from Henrik, listening to Herr Jankier talk about European history. I'd been tutored in Dutch the first year in Willemstad so I could attend the regular school. Now I could speak and understand it. My hands were tired from pulling the vines, and I just wanted to sit and think. I didn't want to work. I said, "Timothy, I'm blind. I can't see to work." I heard him cutting something with his sharp knife. He replied softly, "The hand is not blind." Didn't the old man understand? To work, aside from pulling up vines or drawing something in the sand, you must be able to see. Stubbornly, he said, "We need sleeping mats. You can make the mats." I looked over in his direction. "You do it," I said. He sighed back, saying, "The best mat maker in Charlotte Amalie down in Frenchtown be total blind." "But he's a man, and he has to do that to make a living." "Be true," Timothy said quietly. But in a few minutes he placed several lengths of palm fiber across my lap. "The palm mat is very easy, just over and under." Becoming angry with him, I said, "I tell you, I can't see." He paid no attention to me. "Take this hand and hold the palm like this, then over and under, like the man in Frenchtown, then more palm." I could feel him standing there watching me as I tried to reeve the lengths, but I knew they weren't fitting together. He said, "Like this, I tell you." And he reached down to guide my hand, over and under. I tried again, but it didn't work. I stood up, threw the palm fibers at him, and screamed, "You ugly black man! I won't do it! You're stupid, and you can't even spell!" Timothy's heavy hand struck my face sharply. Stunned, I touched my face where he'd hit me. Then I turned away from where I thought he was. My cheek stung, but I wouldn't let him see me with tears in my eyes. I heard him saying very gently, "Be getting back to work, my own self." I sat down again. He began to sing that fungi and fish song in a low voice, and I could picture him sitting on the sand in front of the hut, those great horny hands winding the strands of vine. The rope, I thought. It wasn't for him. It was for me. After a while, I said, "Timothy." He did not answer, but walked over to me, pressing more palm fronds into my hands. He murmured, "'Tis very easy, over and under." Then he went back to singing about fungi and fish. Something happened to me that day on the quay. I'm not quite sure what it was even now, but I had begun to change. I said to Timothy, "I want to be your friend." He said softly, "You have always been my friend." I said, "Can you call me Philip?" "Philly," he said warmly. During our 7th night on the island, it rained. It was one of those tropical storms that comes up swiftly without warning. We were asleep on the palm mats that I'd made, but it awakened us immediately. The rain sounded like bullets hitting on the dried palm frond roof. We ran out into it, shouting and letting the fresh water hit our bodies. It was cool and felt good. Timothy yelled that his catchment was working. He had taken more boards from the top of the raft and had made a large trough that would catch the rain. He'd picked up bamboo lengths on the beach and had fitted them together into a short pipe to funnel the rainwater into our 10-gallon keg. It rained for almost 2 hours, and Timothy was quite angry with himself for not making a second catchment because the keg was soon filled and overflowing. We stayed out in the cool rain for 20 or 30 minutes and then went back inside. The roof leaked badly, but we didn't mind. We got on our mats and opened our mouths to the sweet, fresh water. Stewcat was huddled in a miserable ball over in a corner, Timothy said, not enjoying it at all. I liked the rain because it was something I could hear and feel, not something I must see. It peppered in bursts against the frond roof, and I could hear the drips as it leaked through. The squall wind was in the tops of the palms, and I could imagine how they looked in the night sky, thrashing against each other high over our little keg. I wanted it to rain all night. We talked for a long time when the rain began to slack off. Timothy asked me about my mother and father. I told him all about them and about how we lived in Schalo, getting very lonesome and homesick while I was telling him. He kept saying, that be true. Then Timothy told me what he could remember from his own childhood. It wasn't at all like mine. He'd never gone to school and was working on a fishing boat by the time he was 10. It almost seemed the only fun he'd had was once a year at carnival, when he'd put frangipani leaves around his ankles and dress up in a donkey hide to parade around with makijumbis, the spirit chasers, while the old ladies of Charlotte Amalie danced the bambula around them. He chuckled. I drink plenty rum those 3 days of carnival. I could picture him in his donkey skin, wheeling around to the music of the steel bands. They had them in Willemstad too. Because it had been on my mind, I told him that my mother didn't like black people, and asked him why. He answered slowly, I don't like some white people my own self, but 'twould be outrageous if I didn't like any of them. Wanting to hear it from Timothy, I asked him why there were different colors of skin, white and black, brown and red, and he laughed back. Why be fish different color or flower be different color? I true don't know, Philip. But I true think beneath the skin is all the same. Herr Jan Kier had said something like that in school, but it did not mean quite as much as when Timothy said it. Long after he'd begun to snore in the dripping hut, I thought about it. Suddenly, I wished my father and mother could see us there together on a little island. I moved close to Timothy's big body before I went to sleep. I remember smiling in the darkness. He felt neither white nor black. In the morning, the air was crisp and the cay smelled fresh and clean. Timothy cooked a small fish, a pompano that he'd speared at dawn down on the reef. Neither of us had felt so good or so clean since we had been aboard the Hato. Without discussing it, we both thought that this might be the day an aircraft would swing up into the devil's mouth if that's where we were. The pompano, broiled over the low fire, tasted good. Of course, we were eating little but what came from the sea, fish, langosta, mussels, or the eggs from sea urchins, those small, black, round sea animals with sharp spines that attach themselves to the reefs. Timothy had tried to make a stew from seaweed, but it tasted bitter. Then he tried to boil some new sea grape roots, but they made us ill. The only thing that ever worked for him was sea grape leaves boiled first in seawater and then cooked in fresh water. But above us, 40 feet from the ground, Timothy said, was a feast. Big, fat, green coconuts. When we'd landed, there were a few dried ones on the ground, but the meat in them was not very tasty. In a fresher one, there was still some milk, but it was rancid. At least once a day, especially when we were around the hut, Timothy would say, "'Tis outrageous them coconut hang up in the sky when we could use the milk and meat." Or he'd say, "Timothy my own self long ago could climb the palm very easy." Or hinting, and I guess looking up at them, "Philip, I do believe you be getting outrageous strong here on the island." He made a point of saying that if he were only 50 again, He could climb the tree and slice them off with his knife, but at 70-odd, he did not think he could make it to the top. That morning over breakfast, Timothy said, looking to the tops of the palms, I'm sure, "A little milk from the coconut would be good now, eh, Philip?" As yet, I didn't have the courage to climb the palms. "Yes, it would," I said. Timothy cleared his throat, sighed deeply, and put the coconuts out of his mind. But I knew he'd try me again. He said, "Them devilin' coconuts aside, your mother would never be knowing you now." I asked why. "You are very brown and very lean," he said. I tried to imagine how I looked. I knew my shirt and pants were in tatters. My hair felt ropey. There was no way to comb it. I wondered how my eyes looked and asked Timothy about that. "They look without cease," he said. "They stare, Philip." "Do they bother you?" Timothy laughed. "Oh, not me. Every day I think what rare good luck I have that you be here with my own self on this outrageous humbug island." I thought a while, then asked him, "How long was it before that friend of yours, that friend in the Barbados, could see again?" Timothy replied vaguely, "Oh, many months, I do recall." "But you told me on the raft it was only 3 days. Did I say that?" "Yes." "Well," Timothy said, "'twas a long time ago, but he got his sight back to be true." He paused a moment, then said, "Now, I tell you, we got much work to do today." I noticed more and more that Timothy always changed the subject when we began to talk about my eyes. He would make any kind of an excuse. "What work?" I asked. "Now, let me see," he said. "For one thing, we must make another catchment, and we must go to the reef for food, and—" I waited. Timothy finally exploded. "Now, that is a lot of work, Philip, to be true." Timothy had fashioned a cane for me, and I was now using it to feel my way around the island. I fell down often, but unless I fell into sea grape, it didn't hurt. Even then, I only got a few scratches. Slowly, I was beginning to know the island. By myself, keeping my feet in the damp sand, which meant I was near the water, I walked the whole way around it. Timothy was very proud of me. From walking over it, feeling it, and listening to it, I think I knew what our cay looked like. As Timothy said, it was shaped like a melon or a turtle, sloped up from the sea to our ridge where the palms flapped all day and night in the light trade wind. The beach, I now believed, was about 40 yards wide in most places, stretching all the way around the island. On one end, to the east, was a low coral reef that extended several hundred yards, awash in many places. I know it was to the east because one morning I was down there with Timothy when the sun came up, and I could feel the warmth on my face from that direction. The sea grape, a few feet tall at the edge of the beach and higher farther back, grew along the slopes of the hill on all sides. There was also some other brush that did not feel like sea grape, but Timothy did not know the name of it. To the south, the beach sloped gradually out into the water. On the north side, it was different. There were submerged coral reefs and great shelves. The water became deep very abruptly. Timothy warned against going into the water here because the sharks could swim close to shore. Timothy said that the water all around the cay was clear and that he could see many beautiful fish. There was brain coral and Oregon pipe coral that the parrotfish would nibble. From what I could feel and hear, our cay seemed a lovely island, and I wished that I could see it. I planned to walk around it at least once a day, following the vine rope from the ridge to the beach, then setting out along the sand. I was starting to be less dependent on the vine rope, and sometimes it seemed to me that Timothy was trying hard to make me independent of him. I thought I knew why, but I did not talk to him about it. I did not want to think about the possibility of Timothy dying and leaving me alone on the cay. Because the rain the night before had made us hopeful, I think both of us did our chores with one ear to the sky, listening for the sound of engines. But all that day we heard nothing but familiar sounds, the surf, the wind, and the cries of seabirds. That night after dinner, Timothy grumbled, "No aircraft. The island must have a Jumbi." "Don't talk nonsense, Timothy," I said. "The evil spirit harass and molest us," he said darkly, "and we do not have a chicken or grains of corn to chase him." I said, "Timothy, you can't really believe in that." My father had told me about Obadiah, or voodoo in the West Indies. It had come over from Africa, of course. Haiti was the worst of all for it, but there was some practice on all the islands. It was mixed up with religion and witch doctors. I knew he was looking at Stukat when he said, "Maybe that outrageous cat is the Jumbi." "He's just an old cat, Timothy," I protested. Recalling everything that had happened, Timothy said, "He came aboard the raft and we got separated from all else. Then the ice got dark, giving us exceeding trouble. Then we float up this humbugging devil's mouth." Angrily I said, "Timothy, Stukat is not a Jumbi. You let him alone." The old man was silent, and I was suddenly worried for Stukat's safety. Timothy stayed by me all night, but in the morning when I awakened, he was gone, and so was Stukat. I crawled out of the hut and began to call for Stu. Then I called for Timothy. There was no answer. I went down the hill and headed up the beach toward the reef. Voodoo was silly, I knew, but it was also frightening. I couldn't understand why Timothy thought Stukat was the Jumbi. I decided to circle the island to find them. Using my cane to feel the way to touch driftwood or coral ledges the night tide might have uncovered, I moved along the damp sand, calling out now and then. When I reached the north side, Timothy answered, "Marnin, Philly." I asked him where he'd been. He laughed. "There is little place to go here. I've been here on this beach." "Where's Stukat?" Timothy was silent. I asked again. "Be getting his own self a lizard, maybe," he answered. But there was something conniving in his voice. All the while I could hear a scraping noise and occasionally a ring of metal. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Cutting on an old piece of wood," he replied. Why would he be down on North Beach this early, cutting wood? I knew he had plenty for the campfire and the signal fire. And you haven't seen Stukat?" "Not a air," he said. I wanted to see what he had in his hands, but I didn't have the courage to walk up and touch it. I said, "Timothy, I'm very hungry." I felt his hand on my wrist. He said, "We'll go to the hut." He fixed breakfast. We ate, and then without a word he slipped away. Usually he kept his hunting knife in the tin box that had stored our biscuits. Also in that box were the dry matches we had left, a few pieces of stale chocolate, and small things that Timothy had salvaged from the beach or the raft. I felt a few nails, the hinges that had been on the raft's trap door, some short lengths of rope, a piece of cork, several small tin cans, and a small roll of something that felt like leather. Nothing was missing except the knife, and I knew he'd taken it to North Beach with him. As best as I could, I searched around the hut area for Stukat, thinking maybe Timothy had tied him up somewhere, yet I was certain he'd be meowing if he was within hearing distance. I was positive that Timothy was back on North Beach cutting on that piece of wood, but something told me not to go down there. So I sat by the hut wondering what to do. It was no good trying to convince him that Jumbi did not exist, nor was there any way to find Stukat if Timothy had hidden him. The morning hours passed slowly. Once, I went down to the East Beach to sit near the signal fire, hoping to hear the drone of an aircraft. Several times over the stir of wind, I thought I heard a faint meow, but I couldn't locate the direction. Maybe all that had happened was beginning to work on the old man's mind. Maybe I was stranded on a tiny, forgotten island in the Caribbean with a madman. If he harmed Stukat because of some silly Jumbi thing, I knew he might also harm me. I thought about getting back on the raft and letting it drift to sea again. I was certain that there were enough boards still on top to sit and sleep on. If I could get the water keg down the hill and the last pieces of chocolate out of the box, I'd be all right for a few days. I got up and went down to the water, feeling my way toward the reef. I knew that if I kept going that way, I'd touch or fall over the length of lifeline rope that tethered the raft. Timothy had driven a heavy piece of driftwood into the sand so that the raft would not go out to sea with the tide. I walked slowly and carefully, expecting at any moment to feel the rope with my cane or have it hit against my ankles. I went all the way to the beginning of the reef without finding it. Then I reversed my course and walked in the other direction. Finally, I stumbled over the heavy piece of wood that Timothy had driven into the sand. I felt around it, but the rope was no longer tied to it. He'd cut the raft loose. Panic swept over me. But taking my bearing from the stake, I decided to go out into the water, hoping to find the raft. A few feet offshore, I got another bad scare. I put my foot down, and something moved. In fact, the whole bottom seemed to move. I lost my balance and fell head first into the water. I came up sputtering and realized I'd stepped on a skate, that diamond-shaped fish with a stinger tail. I'd done that once or twice in West Point. The skate is kin to the deadly sea ray, but this one was as shocked as I was and swam off to deep water. I went out to my waist, feeling with my hands in all directions, but the raft was gone. I trusted Timothy and kept telling myself that he wouldn't harm me, but it was the whole mysterious Jumbi thing that was frightening, and he certainly wasn't acting like the Timothy I'd been living with. In mid-afternoon, he returned to the hut. Neither of us spoke. Then I heard him pounding something. The palm fronds on the hut rattled. Whatever it was, he was pounding it into the hut. Having finished, he went away again. When I heard him moving through the sea grape down the path, I got up and began feeling around the framing of the hut. There was nothing on the sides of it, and I decided that whatever he'd attached had to be on the roof. I knew there were several lengths of log over near the campfire, so I approached it, found one of the logs, and rolled it over to the entrance to the hut. I stood on it and felt along the crossframe that held the roof up. In the very center, I found what I was looking for. I cried out when the palm of my hand touched something sharp. Then, with my fingers, I slowly felt around the object. It had a head. I discovered 4 feet and a tail. Timothy had spent all that time carving a cat, a stew cat. The nails in it were supposed to kill the evil Jumbi. I felt weak and sat down on the log. Soon he came up the path, dropping Stew Cat into my lap. Where was he? I asked. On the raft, of course, Timothy answered. I got him off the island till I could chase the Jumbi. Where's the raft, Timothy? 'Twas off the shore, Philip. 'Tis back now, and our luck is changed. But it didn't change. It got worse. One morning in the middle of May, I awakened to hear Timothy taking great breaths. It sounded as though he were fighting for air. I listened a moment and then asked, "Are you all right, Timothy?" He wheezed back, "Fever, malar." I had to think a moment to understand what he was talking about. Fever? Malaria? I reached over to touch him. His forehead was burning hot. His breath coming in big, harsh sighs. He said, "I got malaria again, Philip. 'Twill go away, but fetch some water." When I had had fever in Virginia, in Escalo, my mother had given me aspirin and then put cold cloths on my head. But we had no aspirin on the Cay, of course, and the water was always warm. I poured some water from the keg and gave it to him. He gulped it and then fell back on the mat. For a while, I listened to his heavy breathing and then ripped a piece of cloth from what was left of my shirt, dampened it with water, and placed it on his forehead. He murmured, "Oh, that'd be good." But suddenly he began to shiver, even though the morning air was already warm. I could hear his teeth clacking. I had nothing to cover him with, so I just sat beside him, holding the cloth, which was already beginning to dry, to his forehead. His breath was like air from a furnace. It must have been about 10 o'clock when Timothy began to mumble and laugh. It sounded almost as if he were talking in his sleep, but the laughter, little bursts of it between the wheezes, was very high and strange. I couldn't keep the cloth on his head because he was tossing from side to side. I talked to him constantly, but he didn't even seem to know I was there. Once he got up and fell back down to the mat, and I told him to stay very still. For a long time he did, because he began to shiver again. When that ended, the mumbling and high laughter started all over. At about noontime, the mumblings got worse, and I could feel him trying to get to his feet. I clung to his arm, shouting for him to lie down again, but he threw me aside as if I weren't there. I could hear him crashing down the hill toward the sea, the frightening laughter echoing back. I followed the trail of laughter. Then I heard splashing and knew he'd gone into the water. I yelled, "Timothy! Timothy, come back!" Suddenly it became dead quiet. I screamed his name again and again. There was no answer. I reached the beach and waded out to my knees, then began to move slowly along, trying to keep on a line with the beach. I had gone about 30 steps when I fell over Timothy's body, plunging down in the water. Holding on to him with one hand, I got on my feet again. The upper part of his body was floating, but I knew his feet were dragging on the bottom. I put my face against his mouth. Yes, he was still breathing. I worked myself around to put both hands under his shoulders, but he was too heavy that way. Then I clasped my hands under his chin and began to pull him out. He made strange sounds, but did not try to help me. It took me what seemed like a long time to get Timothy out of the water and back up on the damp sand. He must have weighed 220 or 30 pounds, and I could only move him 2 or 3 inches at a time. I sat beside him for almost an hour in the hot sun while he rested quietly, his breathing not so harsh now. Then I realized he was shivering again. I knew I could not drag him up the slope to the shelter of the hut, so I tore off branches of sea grape and put them over his body. The grape leaves cut the rays of the sun. I brought water down from the hut, raised his head, and ordered him to drink it. With one hand, I found his lips and then guided the cup to his chin. He seemed to understand and gulped it down. I stayed by him the rest of the long afternoon while he slept. When he awakened, it was early evening and it turned cool again. He was breathing easily now, and I knew the fever had broken because his forehead was no longer hot. Sitting up, he said weakly, "How did I get down here?" I told him he'd run down the hill. "That devil, the fever," Timothy sighed. I said, "You went into the water. You scared me, Timothy." "Ah, that be true," he said. "My head burned with the fire, and I put it out." I helped him to his feet, and we went up the hill together, Timothy leaning on me for support for the first time. He never really regained his strength. It was in late May that I believe Timothy decided we might stay there forever. We had not seen a schooner sail or heard an airplane since setting foot on the island. I know it was late May because each day he dropped a small pebble into an old can that he'd found on the beach. It was our only way to tell how many days we'd been there. Every so often, I'd count them, beginning with April 9th. We now had 48 pebbles in the can. On this day, Timothy said thoughtfully, "Philip, has it ever come into your own self that I might be poorly again some morning?" I knew he was thinking about malaria and the fever. I said it had. He said, "Well, you must then know how to provide your own self with fish." For more than a week, I knew he had been laboring over nails to turn them into fish hooks. He always speared the fish or langosta with a sharp stick, but I could not see, of course, to do that. I knew he was making the hooks for me. He said, with a secret tone in his voice, "I have found an outrageous good hole on the reef in a safe place." We went down the hill and started out along the reef shelf. By now, my feet were tough, and I hardly felt the jagged edges of the coral. But I knew that lurking in the tide pools were the treacherous sea urchins. Stepping on them invited a sharp spine in your foot, and Timothy had already warned me that they're very poison. They be giving you terrible pain. Every 2 feet, Timothy had driven a piece of driftwood deep into the coral crevices so that I could feel them as I went along. Neither of us knew what to do about the sea urchins, but Timothy said he'd think mightily about them. He had taken a large rock to smash them all along the path over the reef top, but in time, they would come back. We went out about 50 feet along the reef, and then he said, "Now we fish." He described the hole to me. It was about 20 feet in diameter and 6 to 8 feet deep. The bottom was sandy, but mostly free of coral so that my hooks would not snag. He said there was a most natural opening to the sea, so that the fish could swim in and out of the coral-walled pool. He took my hand to have me feel all around the edges of the hole. The coral had been smoothed over by centuries of sea wash. Timothy said that the sand in the seawater acted like a grindstone on the sharp edges of the coral. It was not completely smooth, but there were no jagged edges sticking out. "Now, reach down here," Timothy said, "and tug off at the mussel." I put my hand into the warm water, kneeling down over the ledge, and felt a mussel. But in ripping it loose, I lost my balance, and only Timothy's hand prevented me from falling in. If you are blind, the sensation of falling can be terrifying. My memory of the fall off the raft was still very clear. Timothy said, "Easy there, Philip. Just sit a moment and relax." His voice was soothing. "If ever you do fall, just stay in the hole a while. Feel which way the water washes, then follow it to the ledge. Grab hold and pull your own self out." Timothy guided my hands in opening the tough mussel shell and digging the slippery meat out to bait the hook. "'Tis an outrageous sharp knife, so be very careful of your fingers." Then he told me to feel the hook and slip the mussel bait over the barb. I'd fished many times with my father, and this was easy. Rusty bolts served as sinkers. Timothy had found several pieces of wood with bolts in them, had burned them, then raked the bolts out of the ashes. He'd unraveled a lifeline from the raft to make single strands for the fishing line. I dropped the hook and sinker overboard. In a moment, there was a sharp tug. I jerked, flipping the fish back over my shoulder so it would land on the reef. Timothy cheered me and told me to feel along the line to the wriggling fish, then take the hook out. Squirming and jumping in my hand, it was small but fat. I grinned over toward Timothy. When I had fished before, it was fun. Now I felt I had done something very special. I was learning to do things all over again by touch and feel. I said to Timothy, "This is outrageous humbug and good fish hole." He laughed with pleasure. Every day after that, I did all the fishing. Timothy, of course, continued to get langosta. He had to dive for them, but I caught all the fish. After the 3rd morning, he let me go out alone on the reef. I'd feel my way along his driftwood stubs, find the hole, pry a mussel loose, and then fish. I was alone on the reef, but somehow I always felt he was sitting on the beach nearby. I could sense his presence, yet he was always at the hut when I got back there. We often talked about the K and what was on it. Timothy had not thought much about it. He took it for granted that the K was always there, but I told him about geography and how maybe a volcano could have caused the Devil's Mouth. He'd listen in fascination, almost speechless. We talked about how the little coral animals might have been building the formations of the K for thousands of years. I said, then sand began to gather on it, and after more years, it was finally an island. It was as if a new world had opened up for Timothy. He kept using that same expression. "That be true?" I found out that he'd never thought about how the sea grape or the vines or the coconuts came to our K. I told him what I knew. Seeds had drifted in from the sea, or birds had brought them. After a rain, they'd taken root. "The lizard?" he asked sternly. I'd bet a bird, flying from another island holding a mother lizard in its beak, dropped it here. Then the baby lizards were born, or maybe a mother lizard washed ashore on driftwood during a storm. Timothy was very impressed, and I felt good that I'd been able to tell him something. We found a lot to talk about. I think it was the 5th afternoon of this week that I blurted out to Timothy, "I'll climb the palm now." "Eh, Philip?" he said, and I could almost see the grin on his face and the light in his eyes as he looked skyward, greedily, I'm sure. He said, "There is one coconut tree over there that has a sway in his back like an old horse. That is the one to climb." I was trembling a little as he led me to the tree, telling me I should go up just a short way, climb it like a monkey. If I could do it, I was to come back down, put the knife between my teeth, and go up again. The trunk of this palm tree must have been about 2 feet in diameter, because I could easily put my hands around to the back. I grasped it, hunched my body, placed my bare feet on the rough trunk, and began to climb. Timothy was probably holding his breath. I went up about 10 feet and froze. I could not move up or down. My legs and arms were rigid. Timothy, standing below to catch me if I fell, called up softly, "Philip, 'tis no shame to ease your own self back down to the sand." Slowly, I began to back down along the trunk. The bark was rough against my hands and feet, but what I felt most was Timothy's disappointment. I couldn't have been more than a few feet off the ground when I took a deep breath and said to myself, "If you fall, you'll fall in the sand." Then I started climbing again. Timothy called up, "You have forgot the knife." I knew that if I stopped now, I'd never climb it. I didn't answer him, but kept my hands and feet moving steadily. Then I heard him shout, "You'll be getting to the top." Palm fronds brushed my head. I grasped the base of one to pull myself up. Timothy let out a roar of joy. Then he told me how to reach the coconuts. It took a long time to pull, tug, and twist 2 of them loose, but finally they fell. I stayed in the palm another few minutes to rest, then slid down. I had won. As my feet touched the ground, Timothy hugged me, yelling, "The palm harass us no more." We drank every drop of the coconut milk and feasted on the fresh meat. Squatting near me, his teeth crunching the coconut, Timothy said, "You see, Philip, you do not need the eye now. You have done without the eye what I could not do with my whole body." It was almost as if I'd graduated from the survival course that Timothy had been putting me through since we had landed on the quay. It rained that night, a very soft rain. Not even enough to drip through the palm frond roof. Timothy breathed softly beside me. I had now been with him every moment of the day and night for 2 months, but I had not seen him. I remembered that ugly, welted face, but now in my memory, it did not seem ugly at all. It seemed only kind and strong. I asked, "Timothy, are you still black?" His laughter filled the hut. One very hot morning in July, we were down on North Beach, where Timothy had found a patch of calico scallops not too far offshore. It was the hottest day we'd ever had on the quay, so hot that each breath felt like fire, and for once the trade wind was not blowing. Nothing on the quay seemed to be moving. North Beach was a very strange beach anyway. The sand on it felt coarser to my feet. Everything about it felt different. But that really didn't make sense since it was only about a mile from South Beach. Timothy explained, "The North is always the bleak beach on any island," but he couldn't say why. He had just brought some calico scallops ashore when we heard the rifle shot. He came quickly to my side, saying, "That be trouble." Trouble? I thought it meant someone had found the quay. That wasn't trouble. Excited, I asked, "Who's shooting?" "The sea," he said. I laughed at him. "The sea can't shoot a rifle." "A crack-like rifle," he said, worry in his voice. "It can make the shot all right. It be tell us a very bad storm is coming, Philip, a tempest." I couldn't quite believe that. However, there had been distinctly a crack like a rifle or pistol shot. He said anxiously, "The waves do it. Somewhere far out beyond the Grenadines or in that pesky bight off Honduras, a hurricane is spawning. I feel it. What we heard was a wave passing this little humbug point. I heard him sniffing the air as if he could smell the hurricane coming. Without the wind, there was a breathless silence around our cay. The sea, he told me, was smooth as green jelly. But already the water was getting cloudy. There were no birds in sight. The sky, he said, had a yellowish cast to it. Come along, we have much to do. The calico scallop can wait their own self till after the tempest. We went up to our hill. Now I knew why he had chosen the highest point of land on the quay for our hut. Even so, I thought the waves might tumble over it. The first thing Timothy did was to lash our water keg high on a palm trunk. Next, he took the remaining rope that we had and tied it securely around the same sturdy tree. In case the tempest reached this high, lock your arms over the rope and hang on, Philip. I realized then why he had used our rope sparingly, why he had made my guideline down to East Beach from vines instead of rope. Every day I learned of something new that Timothy had done so we could survive. During the afternoon, he told me that this was a freak storm because most did not come until September or October, August sometimes, seldom in July. But this year, the sea be angry with all the death upon it, the war. The storms bred, Timothy said, in the eastern North Atlantic south of the Cape Verde Islands in the fall, but sometimes, when they were freaks and early, they bred much closer, in a triangle way off the northeast tip of South America. Once in a great while, in June or July, they sometimes made up not far from Providencia and San Andres, near us. The June ones were only pesky, but the July ones were dangerous. This be a western storm, I be guessing. They outrageous strong when they come, he said. Even Stucat was nervous. He was around my legs whenever I moved. I asked Timothy what we should do to protect him. He laughed. Stucat be going up the palm on the lee side if it be getting too terrible. Don't worry about Stucat. Yet I could not help worrying. The thought of losing either of them was unbearable. If something bad happened on the quay, I wanted it to happen to all of us.